You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org. This episode of Pizza Quest is brought to you by Central Milling, hand-selected grain, expertly milled for passionate bakers. Central Milling is the farmer, the miller, and the baker working together to preserve American farmland for tomorrow while providing the highest quality flour and grains for the bakers of today. Dating back over 150 years, Central Milling is built on generations of knowledge, and they know that premium flour starts at the source. Employee-owned, Central Milling works directly with their farmers to sustainably grow grains that have exceptional flavor, nutrient content, color, and baking performance, which results in one of the largest selections of premium specialty flour and grains in the country. Hand-selected for the highest baking qualities, milled, cracked, or blended slowly to minimize heat generation, then bake-tested for performance. Learn more about Central Milling and their products at centralmilling.com. Welcome to Pizza Quest. I'm Peter Reinhardt. I'm here at the International Pizza Expo. I've been here now for a day and a half. My brain is starting to weigh down with too much pizza, but we're going to maybe give a slight left turn on pizza and talk a little bit about fermentation, talk about sourdough, but also pizza, because I'm with our old friend Noel Broner, who's been on Pizza Quest before, the proprietor, so to speak, of Slow Rise Pizza, major, I would say, Instagram presence, and also, of course, Los Angeles staple. And in addition to that, is a consultant for other restaurants and pizza makers and everything else. And then we're with James Gaffney, who is, hold your seats and don't turn off the dialer, a molecular biologist. So this is for all that when you want to take a deeper dive into the biology, what I call the biological transformation that takes place in creating bread the best way.
Awesome.
And so James and Noel have been working together on a project. I guess, James, your company or your brand is 11 Foods. So tell us a little bit about what that is, and then tell us, both of you, if you would, a little bit about the project that you were working with the sourdough.
Yeah, so 11 Foods is a company where we're trying to use modern molecular and microbiology to develop new starters for the bread industry. And these starters are going to be defined microbes, and they're going to be instant. So you'll be able to use it exactly how you'll use a traditional baker's yeast, but you'll get all the flavor, nutritional benefits, all the functional benefits and operational benefits that you would get with a baker's yeast. And so our first product that we've been kind of testing is what we're calling an instant sourdough. And so it's a makeup of yeast and bacteria that we've isolated from starters that we've studied, and then we've recombined in a way that it represents the original starter in which they came from. And then we've preserved them, so freeze-dried them just like a baker's yeast, and it comes in a package in which you can make effectively a real sourdough in 6 hours' time without a pre-ferment.
How do you get, because we did a workshop yesterday on fermentation here, people raised a lot of questions about sourdough. We wanted to know, can I really get the full range of flavors from some of these packages? And they've been referring to yours for all I know. I don't know if you're out yet, but there are other versions. How do I get it? Because one of the ingredients you talk about in making a great sourdough is time. You need time to develop the flavor profiles from the molecular activity. How do you shortcut that time by using these packets?
Yeah, so we're bringing in like a higher level, these bacteria and fungi to start with. So we've concentrated it down so you can bring a higher level, so you don't have to bring up the populations like you would with a traditional starter. However, with our product, you can still have some operational change with getting different flavors out of our product even. So you can just add more, just like you can with a baker's yeast, and you can get a quick product that tastes really good, that has a lot of the aspects of a sourdough. But you can also use this product to do overnight or longer fermentations where you would use lower inclusion amounts and get some of the broader breadth of all these flavors that are benefited from slow fermentation.
So you would just modify the amount that you use and change the timing.
Fermentation conditions, temperature.
So you guys have been working on testing out all those permutations and possibilities. And how do you teach your end users how to use it?
Yeah, so luckily we have Noel, and as you know, Noel is great with dough, so we've been able to get it in his hands, and he's really been able to work out all these different types of doughs, so he can probably tell you a little bit more about what he's been doing.
So talk us about some of the testing that you've done and what some of the outcomes that you've achieved.
Excellent. So, Peter, thank you for having us. I haven't seen you in probably maybe 4 years.
Well, not in person, true, but we did see you on Pizza Quest on the Zoom.
Yeah, but I think that was probably in 2021 or 2020. Yeah.
You were my pandemic guru because you were the first one to show me that you could do Zoom, and I never even heard the name. And
that is correct.
You recreated a Pizza Expo experience when the expo was canceled due to the pandemic.
That is true. In 2020, I decided there's no way that we're going to get canceled, and I held basically the Pizza Expo online in my living room, in your living room, in everybody's living room, and we raised a bunch of money for Slice Out Hunger, and we kept the vibe positive, right?
It was such a new idea back then to be able to do it virtually.
Zoom webinars. I didn't know what they were, but
and you introduced me to a guy from India.
Sure.
What was his nickname?
Oh, who can remember? Yeah,
he had a great nickname, and as a result of working with him, we hired him later to produce the International Symposium
beautiful.
on Bread.
I totally forgot.
So it was a great serendipitous gathering. Hard to believe 4 years have gone by.
Hard to believe. It's actually, I think, been 5 years since that one.
Amazing.
But maybe 4 years since I've been on. So thank you for having me back.
Sure thing.
Thank you for welcoming my friend James. So I'm here actually this year not working any of the booths. I'll probably be working next year, but a lot of my friends are working. So I'm having fun ping-ponging back and forth. But the reason I'm here this year is really just to walk the floor with different clients. And so I'm spending some time with my friend James here and his friend and partner and my friend and partner Cameron, and so they came up with this idea, this concept for a new sourdough product. And so by the time they approached me, they already had the product, but they didn't really have very much product testing and proof of concept done. So this is a little different than what I normally do, but I really welcome it. And so just to give you an idea of the kind of testing you do, imagine this. Imagine you are a home baker or you're a baker that owns a pizzeria and you use instant dry yeast. Great. In baker's math, what percentage of instant dry yeast do you use? Are you at 0.1% IDY, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4?
Right, it can vary.
It varies. If you're using active dry, at what percentage are you? Fresh or sourdough.
Right.
Now, depending on what recipe you use and what percentage you use and what temperatures you use, we're able to kind of backward engineer your process and say, look, just use 2 grams of this, just use 4 grams of this, just use 6 grams of this. Boom, it should be like apples to apples. It should be. But what's really wonderful is that as we test and we work with people like, Chris Bianco or Brian Spangler or any of the people that I've reached out to, we find that, they're using sourdough or instant dry or active dry or fresh yeast, but they're not doing it the traditional way. So that's actually really awesome because that's what I call stress testing. If everything were so simple that you could just plug in the percentages that I just mentioned, we wouldn't even be sitting here. We would already be on a desert island counting our money.
Drinking your mimosas or whatever.
Yeah. So, but honestly, all kidding aside, what we're trying to do is we're trying to simulate the flavor, the color, the aroma, the texture that you get from sourdough, but also the performance and the outcome that you get from a commercial yeast product. Right? And the consistency.
And one of the consumer promises is that they ought to be able to do it in a shorter amount of time rather than the longer overnight or extended fermentation times.
And as you know from somebody who's been using sourdough for a long time, it's actually pretty easy to go like 40% levain, and 6 hours later have a beautiful, beautiful loaf of bread.
True.
But most pizza makers don't think about pizza in 6 hours. That would be considered like an emergency or a quick dough.
Backup dough, yeah.
Right?
But at the same time, if you're using, let's say, a 40% starter instead of the traditional 15% starter or whatever, you're already putting in pre-fermented dough into that mix. When you're putting in a packet that's only like a half a percentage of the flour weight, you're still using all virgin dough. So
That's correct. And here's the amazing thing. I kind of didn't believe it when they told it to me, but they gave me some very, very, very small samples because we can't make this stuff fast enough, right? And so in the end, I realized this is actually true. But here's the thing: as with sourdough, you're not fermenting your dough at 70 or 65 degrees like you would maybe with a yeasted dough that uses IDY, overnight ferment, for pizza. A sourdough is very comfortable at 80 or 85 degrees, right? A desired dough temperature, a DDT of 80 or 85 isn't crazy for sourdough. And so that's what we use. You tell that to a pizza maker, they're like, oh, it's going to over-ferment. No. Trust us when we tell you. And so as long as they follow our instructions, they can. Most people don't need pizza in 6 hours. Most people need pizza within, let's say, 24 hours, 16 hours, 8 hours. All my Neapolitan friends, they're between 8 and 16. So that's kind of what we shoot for. 8 hours would be like if you were making dough in the morning for evening service. And if you're making dough in the evening for morning or lunch service, that would be more like a 16-hour dough.
So is the pizza marketplace your target, or is it bakers in general?
That's an excellent question, and I have two answers: yes, and I don't know. And the reason
you can tell what a great question it was when the answers are that short.
No, but here's one thing I'm learning from scientists is that if you don't know the answer to the question, say you don't know.
That's a good point.
Right?
Yeah.
Better than bluffing.
And to add to that, we're just trying to figure out what the market is for the product. So I think, bread bakers will find it very useful too. I think home bakers will find it useful, as well as small producers and industrial producers. I think it can bring advantages to each one of those groups. However, we've kind of got to let the market tell us, do they value those things, So
how are you finding that out?
Excellent question.
Yeah.
So let me give you, for example. I met with Chris Bianco a couple of weeks ago, and all I did was bake 2 loaves of bread in the evening, starting at about 5 o'clock, right? 14 hours later, I was heading out the door to meet him at his pizzeria. And so I handed him a loaf of bread that had, just been baked. I handed him a knife with a serrated edge and a cutting board. I said, try it. There's nothing I can convince you to do or say. Just try it and tell me what you think. He ate half the loaf. And then he called out Marco, his head baker. He said, Marco, you got to try this.
Marco, his brother?
No, well, that's, no,
Marco.
Actually, if you look on Chris's phone, there's Marco and Marco LA. This is Marco LA, his head baker.
Okay, yeah. Okay, cool.
So anyway, long story short, he gave it to Marco, and Marco, even though Marco makes pizza, I think he has a lifelong relationship with bread, so they made a beautiful bread with him. So for people who know how to make bread, which is a lot of pizza makers these days, same thing. I gave some to my friend Joey Folks in Costa Mesa. He made a beautiful 100% hydration loaf of bread with it. Daniele from Pizzana, I gave him some. He made bread with it. So I think the fact that you can take this and make bread with it in 6 or 8 or 12 hours is great.
It is. It's kind of like a mind-bending in a sense when we spent the last 30 years trying to convince everyone to slow it down.
Yeah, slow it down.
Because of these benefits. And now we can say, or you can do this and you don't have to slow it down and you still get the benefits.
The benefits.
What are the trade-offs? Are there any trade-offs in the negative sense of going 6? You mentioned that you can do it overnight instead by using less starter, but is there a qualitative difference by going slower?
I would not say there's a qualitative difference. Here's one thing that we did notice. We've done a pretty deep dive into what is in people's sourdough starters, and there's actually a lot of variation. I'll let James talk more about that in people's starters. And so from starter to starter, depending on what flour they may have used to start it with, what they're feeding it with, what their feeding schedule is, is, where they are in the world, and the microbes present in that environment, you get radically different results. But we get very similar results from batch to batch. James?
Yeah, and so just speaking kind of more broadly about the diversity in starters, and might be kind of part of the reason why some bakers, when they're communicating with each other, they say, oh, well, my starter performs at this temperature, and it performs really well, and I get a not as an acidic product, and some other baker will say, well, that's not consistent with, what I see when I bake, is that there's diversity. And so in each one of these starters, there's generally, a handful of species of yeast and bacteria, but that can vary greatly from starter to starter.
Right.
And, I think overall the ecosystem, we're seeing about, 40 to 50 different species of yeast, 100 to 200 species of bacteria worldwide in the starters that have been studied.
Yeah.
So there's a great amount of, diversity out there, and that's part of what our project is to try to give people options to go to these starters, find out what diversity exists, and then not only that, but what functional difference exists, and then give bakers and pizza makers those tools to kind of make the bread that they want to make under the conditions that they want to make it.
Do those options include different strains of starter for different flavor profiles? What, a San Francisco version versus a Russian version or a Mesopotamian?
Two answers to that: yes and not yet.
All right.
Yeah. So,
well, at least we got past the no. We got a yes and I did. Okay.
Yeah. So there's definitely different properties amongst between these starters, and we're going to make an effort to kind of give people options. So some of the things that we're kind of messing around with now, beyond this just traditional standard sourdough starter, which is our original, our first product, is stuff like, say that you don't like a very sour sourdough. We're going to try to find bacteria, or we have discovered some bacteria that die at a certain pH. So your bread will never, or your pizza will never get more sour than a certain level. So you can ferment for longer, and you have a little bit more process flexibility in that sense.
That's amazing. Now we're really getting into the deep dive of of microbiology, which is happening. I mean, there are study groups, and I'm sure you've been part of them. At North Carolina State, you were hooked up with Ann Madden, I believe, on this project, who we brought as a speaker to our bread symposium, who first talked to us about finding wild yeast in the belly of a wasp and how to propagate that and turn it into bread and beer. And so there are these groups. I won't call them geek out groups, but groups that geek out on fermentation and stuff that most people would go like, what are you talking about? But there's more people like that. And I think that they're going to get pretty excited about this work that you're doing.
Yeah, that's what we hope. And we hope we can bring really good products that fit, that solve problems that people have and make it really easy. And, what we've really seen, depending on what type of baker you are, it's really difficult for home bakers to maintain these starters, and it's really expensive. And then once they get to the end point where they've fed their starter and they're ready to bake with it, they get really different and varying, results because they don't have the expertise. So we're really hoping to bring that consistency to home bakers. And then for industrial scale bakers, it's really hard to scale sourdough. You have to make thousands of pounds of liquid, sourdough starter, and most people just don't have the operation for that.
Did you test yours against the Puratos liquid sourdough starters to see how they compared?
Yeah, we haven't done any of that testing.
They were out with that about 5 or 7 years ago. And I've lost track of how much traction they're getting. But
yeah, and we haven't done any of that testing, but we see our product as quite different from that, just because it's dried, it's instant. You don't have to have the bulk of a traditional starter. You don't have to make a traditional starter. It's just hopefully can really streamline everybody's operation and bring sourdough to a larger group of people and make it so they can execute, and make it so they can make really great bread and pizza at the end,
When people are making baguettes and French breads, A lot of them are using pre-ferment techniques like pouliches and migos and things to pre-ferment some of the dough, not with sourdough, but with just yeast, to improve the acidity and the flavor of the dough. Do you find that your product, we'll just call it leaven for now, because that's the name of your company, leaven, that it works in conjunction with some of these pre-ferment techniques? Is there any value, or does it just totally eliminate the need for pre-ferment?
That's an excellent question. And one of the things that we learned in our trials is we weren't just working with pizza makers, we were working with bakers. And a lot of bakers, as you know, will use, let's say they'll make a baguette, like somebody like Chad Robertson, and they'll use 2 or 3 pre-ferments, right? Chad has a famous baguette that uses a sourdough and 2 different pouliches, right? A 4-hour and maybe a 12 or a 16-hour. So we ran into some of those people too. One of our friends at Bub and Grandma's, a local bakery here, that's how they do one of their bread products. So we got amazing feedback from them. And so what we said, one of the things you can try is like, all right, let's try this. Let's sub out the levain in your formula for our microbes, and let's sub out the instant dry yeast in your pouliche for some of our microbes. How did that go? Great. Now, let's sub out the levain in your formula and for our microbes, but let's keep the pouliche made with instant dry yeast and see how that works. We're not saying that the product that we have now is the best. What we're saying is we want to see how the best bread bakers and pizza makers in the world can use it, and we want feedback.
Yeah, and you've got to basically open source it so that you can find out, because you might be onto something that's such a game changer that all the conventional wisdom that we've worked so hard to get over the last 25 years kind of can take a back seat. But then again, you might find new permutations to say, okay, this in conjunction with that gives us even something we hadn't thought of.
The thing that I hope for the most in a project like this is a continuum of happy accidents.
There you go. That's nice. So how far along are we? Number one, are we in the beta stage, the testing stage? Is it commercialized yet? Is it available or what?
Yeah, so, we did the R&D, got the microbes that we were interested in, and then, we're able to then manufacture them at a very small scale and then do the beta launch and get it out to a collection of bakers and pizza makers and just let them mess around with it, see, what they thought about it. And so that went really well. We got a ton of really good feedback. And now we're going out and we're trying to get people involved and raise money so we can manufacture this and bring it to the marketplace on a large scale.
Well, let's talk about the manufacturing side of it. How can you produce it in, number one, in scale, scaling it up? And how are you currently doing it?
Yeah, so currently we're doing it at bench scale. So this is in the lab. We're growing it up in liter-sized bottles. We're centrifuging it down, and then we're freeze drying it on a lyophilizer. We get the product. We make sure that it's viable, that we know what we have. We double check that it's the right species, and then we mix all the different species together that we're interested in, and then put it in a package and get to people. Now, that obviously doesn't work, long term. It took us, 2 months to produce enough material for maybe 10 to 20 bakers to have beta test material.
And by that we mean 40 to 80 grams each total.
Yeah, really? Because you really just don't have a lot to share.
Yeah.
I think you've used one of my colleagues, right, at Johnson & Wales.
We sure did. He got 40 grams too.
And he loves testing things like that.
Yeah, and so long term, that's why we need to raise money. Is we'll go to these larger contract manufacturing organizations, and they'll be able to grow it at scale for us.
So you can farm that out.
Yes.
Well, that's good. So it's scalable in that regard.
Exactly.
But you would have to go to a place that really has the controls in contamination controls and all.
Yeah, and it's quite simple, actually. The organisms that we find in sourdough, for the most part, are not super complex in terms of growing them at scale. There's a lot of other people working with really, really difficult organisms from very difficult environments that require much more. So the industry is well developed for this.
Wow. Well, this is pretty exciting, I have to say. You guys must be kind of excited as you wait for people's results. You got some great influencers already involved, like Chris Bianco. And
let's not call them influencers. Let's call them bakers and pizza makers, shall we?
Well, but I hate to say it, but they are also influencers because why use them if they don't have influence? I mean, if your neighborhood pizza guy loves it, that's good.
Yeah.
If Chris Bianco loves it, that's great for marketing.
Okay, but let's talk about that because I think that's a really important point you're making. Because here's the thing: one of the things that we're doing today is we're looking around the floor of the Pizza Expo for strategic partners for next year.
Yes.
And so the most important thing that can happen is next year when we're here with all of our partners, right? The oven company, the flour company, etc. Mom and pop from you name it USA are going to walk over and eat a slice of cheese pizza and are going to be like, wow, that's really good. What is that? They don't want to know about wild bacteria and yeast and microbes and any of that stuff.
Right.
We just say,
They just want step
here's
1, 2,
what it
and 3.
is.
Yeah.
May I ask what kind of yeast you're currently using? Oh, fresh yeast, great. For every ounce of fresh yeast, you'll need a half an ounce of this stuff. What other questions do you have? Oh, you want to see how to use it? At 2 o'clock, we're going to have a demo. And then we're going to have demos for IDY, ADY, fresh, and sourdough. If you want to go from your sourdough to our sourdough, great. I've got a client right now that I'm working with in Chicago. They have a big problem. They want to move to sourdough, but they're closed on the weekends, right? But they do a huge pizza game during the week because they're in a commercial zone, right? So how do they keep their sourdough going on the weekends? You don't have to with this product. You come in at 6 o'clock in the morning just like normal, and you have pizza by 11.
Right.
Right?
Right. Well, that's the stuff that gets people's attention for sure.
Yeah.
And then the final question would be then, does it really work? Does it deliver on the promise?
Well, you know what? That's an excellent question. Here's what I would say. It depends on what you want. Because let's say the Dan Richards of the Razzas of the world, right?
Yeah.
These are guys who take so much pride in what they do.
Pizzerias,
The
yeah.
Daniele Uditi's from Pizzana, right? I don't know if those people are going to want to give up their babies, their sourdough.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not for them. But for all the people, including myself, who have tried and failed to scale up sourdough, right? I don't mean that I've always failed, but I've had some of my worst days have been with sourdough. Let's just put it that way.
What about, now, we're talking about artisan quality bakers. What about some of the big scale bakers? We did a show earlier today with people from, what was the chain, Liam, that we had? Marco's Pizza.
Yeah.
1,000 shops.
Yeah.
They're doing a yeast pizza dough, and every of the 1,000 shops, everyone makes their own dough.
Yeah.
This could be it, but they're not doing sourdough because they can't manage that much stuff.
Yeah.
One customer, one client doing 1,000, is worth 1,000 individual operators.
This is actually perfect for something like that because
Yeah.
you can have a lot more consistency.
Let's talk after the show. I'll hook you up with our contacts there.
There you go.
We can
But
all
you know,
score brownie points.
we're also talking to giant bakeries that are doing artisan style dough.
That's right.
And a lot of them are very impressed with the potential for a product like this.
You're working at all with in your neighborhood.
I cannot confirm or deny that
stuff.
at this
Yeah.
juncture.
Yeah.
But they would be.
I'm required to ask you, but I don't expect an answer.
I can neither confirm nor deny your assertion, sir.
And here is your Teflon pan. And thank you.
Yes.
This is, I have to say, exciting news,
It is
scary
exciting
news, because anytime you come up with something that is so out of the box, innovative, that it rattles people's cages, especially people who've invested a lot of time and energy.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it is so important as you bring it along to find early adapters or adopters, whoever who use it, who people trust and believe. Their credibility carries over.
And when you talk about like somebody like Daniele Oditi or Dan from Pizzana or even Chris Bianco, these people have the highest integrity on the planet in terms of the way they think about food, in terms of the food quality and integrity that goes into what they put out. So I would be embarrassed to bring them a product that didn't serve their purpose, their higher purpose, right? And look, there's a lot of talk out there about this frankenfood that's being created by AI and computers and who knows what people are thinking. But you'll never replace a great baker. You'll never create something that takes the place of an artisan product.
And also, this product is not engineered. This product is essentially just through trial and error of working with living organisms. You're not short-circuiting anything there. If I'm hearing it correctly.
Yeah.
There's no, what's the word? biological manipulation.
It's not GMO in any way. It's not engineered in any way. These are natural microbes isolated directly from sourdough starters and not altered in any way.
So it's a clean product, and yet it's going. Theoretically, our hopes are it's going to deliver a great product, great finished product in less time. It's changing the classic formula of how to get to a great finished loaf or a finished dough by introducing a different kind of a leaven.
Exactly. And also the operational benefits of not having to maintain the starter, and then like in the future, we're going to be able to offer flavors that maybe people can't even get from a traditional starter. That's the hope. We don't know.
That would be the great, down the road plan. When you go on Shark Tank, that's going to be the question that Mr. Wonderful is going to ask you is, what do we have after this? What's next? So, but it's exciting.
Well, that's one of the fun things about working with all of the pizza makers we've been working with, because we send them these microbes, they make pizza, they tell us what they like, what they don't, and they're like, what would be really cool? And we're like, wow, that's a great idea. Let me write that down. Let me give you just one example. You probably know as well as anybody that when you use sourdough, sometimes you run into issues with browning and caramelization, right?
Yep.
And that just happens, depending on a whole lot of things that we don't have the time to get into. But one of the things that we're going to do is I would love to create a sourdough that promotes browning. So if you're looking for to do like a sourdough Detroit style or pan pizza, but you notice sometimes you don't get the same level of browning with your sourdough as you do with your instant dry, active dry, or fresh yeast, not a problem anymore.
And you think that it can be done biologically and molecularly, not by adding anything to it?
Correct.
Barley malt or something.
No, exactly.
No? We're hoping. We're pulling for you.
Thank you, Peter.
We always want and it's what what's known in the industry as a BHAG, right? A big, hairy, audacious goal. And you got to have them, the world doesn't change.
Yeah.
So, as always, Noel, you're always bringing us some interesting stuff. If people want to follow up with you personally, they're listening to the show and they go, I'd like to get on their tester list or whatever, how can they write to you or contact you?
So they can contact me. I'm Noel at slowrisepizza.com.
Noel at slowrisepizza.com.
That's my email. And if people want to get a hold of me on Instagram, it's Slow Rise Pizza, and I can put you guys in touch with the powers that be at Levin Foods.
At Levin Foods. So, okay, so everyone should go through you. You'll be the gatekeeper.
That's probably the easiest thing. Also, I have their contact information. One of the interesting things that we've been doing, because we're not really on the down low, we've been doing these sourdough Zooms for about 6 months. So if they go on to the Slow Rise Pizza YouTube page, they can see a lot of the posts that we did. They were just short 1-hour Zooms, and James was there, and Cameron was there, and a lot of the pizza and bread makers, and even beer brewers, and just people in the sourdough community have been our guests, and they can begin to learn some of the stuff that we've been putting out there in advance of our launch.
So if you're hearing about this for the first time listening today, it sounds like a sudden thing, but in reality, this is a slow rise project that is beginning to tip over now.
Absolutely.
So we're at the almost at the tipping point. So we need any of you to want to follow up on it, to contact Noel and get on the on the videos and everything else. And
there's a lot of great information out there, and I've enjoyed getting it out. And I've actually learned quite a lot from my own videos. How about that, Peter?
I love it. We love it. Well, if we stop learning, we stop living. So I'm so glad that you're still on fire. And James, it's been great to meet you and hear about what you've been doing. How did you? Before we run out of time completely, how did you get on this track? How did you kind of get into this?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So Cameron and I both were molecular and microbiologists, and we've been working in the microbe world for a long time, and working on various projects across human health, across environmental microbiology, with animal health. And, we were both pretty passionate about fermented foods. We've been doing work with all types of ferments, beer, kombucha, sauerkraut.
Yeah, fermentation is a huge category, yeah.
Yeah, and bread. And I, personally, I've been baking bread, and struggling with it for 15 plus years, And so when we were looking around, the landscape, all these other foods kind of have way more commercial cultures available to them. And we were just saying, this doesn't make any sense. The yeast industry in baked goods hasn't changed since the late 1800s. And so it's not because there's a lack of organisms out there. So why? why hasn't that changed? And so that's really kind of what propelled us forward.
Wonderful. Well,
yeah.
Good luck to you guys both. Thanks for sharing all this. You heard it here first on Pizza Quest if you're not already on their list. And if you're already on their list, then you didn't need to listen to this today. But you got probably a lot of backstory, which we love. And as always, Noel, great to see you. Hard to keep up with you. You're always one step ahead of everybody else.
I try. It's a fast-moving world, the pizza game, right?
It is. And, I know you said you have other clients and you're walking around the show. So this isn't your only project.
Oh, no.
Well, next time we'll talk about some of those projects as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Guys, thank you for being part of Pizza Quest today. Thank you all for listening and tuning into Pizza Quest. Join us on the next episode where we'll continue the never-ending search for the perfect pizza. Thank you.
Pizza Quest is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.